Lieutenant Colonel Doug Cain, Louisiana State Police. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members.
Trooper Cain, can you please identify yourself for the record?
Yes, Lieutenant Colonel Doug Cain, Assistant Superintendent, Chief of Staff, State Police. And I do have some brief comments to make, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, members, I appreciate the opportunity to clarify my position at State Police back in 2019 and 2020. I had no role, responsibility, or authority over the investigation of Mr. Greene's death. I was the executive officer, and that comprised of two commands. That was the staff and administrative components of the superintendent's office. One command is operational development, which consists of policy, legislation, grants, and research. The other command is public affairs and recruiting. So those were the two commands that I was responsible for. Our team did push out initial information regarding the death of Mr. Greene. We contacted the local PIO, and Troop F contacted the media there in Monroe and provided statements. And there were 3 articles published regarding the death, noting that there was a pursuit, a crash, a struggle, altercation, unconscious, and he passed away. I'm not aware of any time where a spokesperson of State Police said that Mr. Greene died in a crash, and I have those articles here and can provide links to those. So you can see that the day of the crash, we did acknowledge the basic circumstances of the incident as we knew it at that time. We had no further work with regards to the investigation until later in 2020, when media inquiries started and public records requests began being filed, mostly in September of 2020. And that's when we got pretty busy involving this incident. I never had any interaction or communication with anybody on the investigative team during the investigation in 2019. None at all. So with that, I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Trooper Cain, let me ask you a question. Have you met with District Attorney Belton in the last 3 years?
In 2020. No, yeah, 2020.
And that was regarding the Ronald Greene incident, is that not correct?
Yes, he asked to meet with the Colonel Davis and I, and our new administration when we were appointed.
And have you, in 2020 till now, met with the investigators in the Ronald Greene matter?
I've not met with them. I've spoken to one of them in the fall of 2020.
And let's be clear, which investigators are you referring to?
The one I spoke with, Sergeant Paxton.
Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Representative Billio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lieutenant Colonel Doug Cain, you sat in these hearings last week, true?
No, ma'am, I was not here.
You were not here?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Did you speak with anyone in advance of your testimony today?
No, ma'am.
And did you review any documents in advance of today?
No, ma'am.
And I'm not asking you for the content of any discussions with an attorney, because that would be privilege. But did you speak with an attorney before testifying today?
No, ma'am.
Now, you were a major under former Colonel Reeves, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you were his confidential assistant?
No, ma'am, I was executive officer.
Executive officer. Tell me what executive officer means, and what's the difference between that and what I considered a confidential assistant?
I was specifically responsible for 2 commands, which are administrative commands in the superintendent's office. One being operational development, one being public affairs and recruiting. So I was responsible for those commands and their staff.
Now, following Colonel Reeves' resignation, you were promoted to Chief of Staff, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's the number 2 position in State Police?
Yes, ma'am.
And so you took Lieutenant Colonel Mike Noel's position?
Yes, ma'am.
Under Colonel Reeves, was it your role to assist legal affairs with public records requests?
Yes, ma'am.
And you were part of all command staff meetings to include Monday morning briefings?
I was not.
You were not?
No, ma'am.
Did you ever sit in on any of those briefings?
The only role that I played was during the Monday morning meeting, the PIO does a PIO brief, and the Intel component does an Intel brief, and then we leave, and then the executive staff meets. I never was a part of the weekly executive staff meetings. I wasn't on the executive staff.
Okay. Did you attend any disciplinary review committee meetings?
I did sit in DRCs, but not a participant, just an observer.
Sure. What date did you become aware of the in-custody death of Ronald Greene?
Probably the next day when the Troop FPIO did the interviews.
And how soon after his death did you and the other lieutenant colonels meet to view the body-worn cameras and the in-car cameras involving his death?
I wasn't a lieutenant colonel at the time. I probably 3 weeks.
Okay. And I understand you weren't lieutenant colonel,
Mm-hmm.
but you met with the lieutenant colonels to review those cameras, correct?
I was
Put it down.
staff. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And that was about 3 weeks later?
Yes, ma'am.
How many videos did you review at that time?
I just remember 2.
Okay. But there was certainly, you were aware that there were more than two troopers on the scene of his death, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you were aware certainly that there had been full deployment of body cameras, correct?
I wasn't involved in the investigation, so I don't know what the investigators had.
But I guess what I'm saying is when state police went to body cameras, there was a big press conference about the full deployment of body cameras, which full deployment means everyone gets one, right?
It was a rollout.
Sure. But that was back in 2016. So by 2019, everybody had body cameras, right?
I'm not sure. I wasn't involved in the deployment of it.
And they were deployed for transparency and accountability was the quote, as I remember, from the press conference, correct?
Sure.
Sure. And so when did you review Lieutenant Clary's video?
I didn't review any video. I mean, personally, I was in the room when other people viewed it.
Well, that's an interesting point. There's supposed to be an audit trail with the viewing of these videos on Axon, correct?
There is.
And so I didn't see your name anywhere on the audit trail, but you viewed the video, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Typically, you know, somebody may come in and show the video for the staff, but I didn't personally review it.
Sure, and typically, am I right that somebody may download that video to a thumb drive or may record the video on the phone?
I'm sure it's possible, yes, ma'am.
Sure.
You know, my practice now as chief of staff, where I do have a reason to specifically review, is noted in the log, viewed video per administrative investigation or inquiry.
And when did you start making those kind of notes?
That's when I was chief of staff, September 30th, 20.
Okay, so then your notes, you have notes that reference the viewing of the video?
It should be in the system.
Would you also, it should be in the system?
Yes,
the
ma'am.
The Axon audit
Yes,
trail
ma'am.
that you reviewed?
When you go into Axon and you review, you can note why.
Would Axon note that everyone who was in the room to review?
No, ma'am.
So, for instance, if someone downloads it to a thumb drive or records it on the phone, then that would allow them to say, go to the governor's staff, the governor, anybody, and allow them to see that video without there being an audit trail, correct?
I've never manipulated the system, ma'am. I've never used it in that capacity. I've only, logged on.
I didn't say you did,
Yeah.
Lieutenant Colonel, but I asked you if that is done, if it's downloaded to a thumb drive or if someone in the room records it.
I can't speak to if it was downloaded or how it is. I don't even know how.
Now, let me ask you, did you agree with Colonel Reeves' assessment of Greene's death as being awful but lawful?
I have no comment on that. I mean, that's his comment.
And I asked you if you agreed with it. So what was your assessment after you viewed the videos?
That's an ongoing investigation, ma'am. I'm not going to speak to the investigation.
Now, did you, Colonel Reeves, Attorney Faye Morrison, and all the lieutenant colonels, Mike Noel, Oliphant, Adam White, and Lane Barnum, receive weekly updates on significant investigations?
I did not. That's done in the Monday morning meeting.
Okay. So that's not done in the disciplinary review, but those are the Monday morning meetings where you step out after there's the information that you need for public affairs.
Yes, ma'am. We're there for 5-7 minutes between the public affairs brief and intel brief, and we leave.
You would agree that Ronald Greene would be a significant investigation that would be the subject of a Monday morning meeting, correct?
I can't speak to that, ma'am. I didn't attend them.
Now, isn't it true, Lieutenant Colonel Cain, at that time you had unfettered access to the governor's staff?
No, I mean, no, ma'am. I dealt with primarily the press staff because that was one of my commands.
And when you say you dealt primarily with press staff, who would those individuals be?
Christina Dayrees and Shauna Sanford.
Is it your testimony that you didn't communicate with the governor's staff on a regular basis regarding many issues associated with the state police?
Not regular. If something of interest, call and give them a heads up.
Okay. Would something of interest be the in-custody death of Ronald Greene?
Sure.
Okay. And so when did you give the governor's staff the heads up on anything involving Ronald Greene's death?
I didn't speak to the governor's staff probably until fall of 2020 when the public records request started coming in.
And is it your testimony that's the first conversation, communication? Let me say communication,
Yeah.
because, of course, conversations could be by phone, could be by text. You would agree, right?
Yeah.
So would that be the first time you had a communication with the governor's staff regarding the Ronald Greene death?
I don't remember any specific conversations. Like I said, we dealt with the initial incident, was handled locally, and then we didn't deal with much until 2020 when the media inquiries began.
Now, Lieutenant Colonel, you heard Triet Lee's testimony regarding the wiping or sanitization of your phone. Why did you have your cell phone sanitized?
I can't speak to that, ma'am.
Did you give Triet Lee your phone?
I can't speak to my cell phone, ma'am. I notified the chairman that there's a internal investigation underway to ensure transparency by Colonel Davis. He's looking into that matter.
Representative Miller, can I interrupt you for just one brief
You
second?
sure can.
You did email me yesterday, the evening before the hearing, to let me know that you are now, there's an investigation being taken place. I'm trying to understand how that is when you just said transparency, how that is more transparent than you just answering the questions publicly.
I've been ordered not to speak to it.
So the cell phone issue has been existing for a while now. I mean, it didn't happen yesterday, correct?
All right.
And magically, I gotta tell you, I think this is the opposite of transparency. Y'all have had all this time. We've even talked about it for a while, and y'all do nothing on this issue. We start talking about it, wanting to know some answers on it, and then conveniently you conduct an investigation so you can come in here and say, I can't talk about it on the eve of the hearing. Did you see how that looks?
Representative McGee, I mentioned in the email I'm ready for this to conclude, and we'll certainly share it.
That's not my question.
Yeah.
Do you see how that looks?
I don't know how it looks, sir.
You're telling me your testimony have you ever seen the movie Son of a Woman?
I have.
Have you seen the end of it when they're doing the big hearing and the testimony? They're trying to figure out what happened.
Mm-hmm.
You're familiar with it?
I don't remember that.
You don't? Mm-hmm. It's a really good movie. I'm going to tell you what happens, and we can talk about it. Mm-hmm. In it, you got 3 kids who are accused of witnessing an incident.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, do they do what's best for their future, or do they tell the truth? Two kids take the easy route out, which is they can't quite see what happened, even though they could. And they're coached to do this because that way they don't have to technically lie, but they can get out of actually telling the truth. It's a very gray area. And Charlie, the protagonist of the show, he's confronted whether he wants to embrace and have his future laid out for him in his career, or does he want to tell the truth? And what Charlie does is he tells the truth, and then he's saved to a degree by the colonel, who comes in and basically lambasts everybody. And at the end of it, the two other witnesses feel very good about themselves. And Al Pacino, the best part of that whole movie is when he tells them very colorfully that they're not good friends either, because what they did was not really telling the truth, and that they shouldn't be so proud of themselves. He does it more colorfully, and then they get to stay in school, of course, because the system always works that way. But they get some sort of like little slap on their wrist. Your testimony today, and actually Colonel Reeves' testimony, reminds me eerily of the two other people. Meaning, you come in here, and I'm getting frustrated with it because you've had all this opportunity. Colonel Davis has had all this opportunity to investigate these phones. This isn't new information. This is no like, and you're saying I can't speak to that. You're like the two little guys. Stretch. I couldn't quite see what happened that night. And that's, to me, extremely frustrating because it's not dishonest. I don't think you're not telling the truth, but you're not telling everything that you actually know, or you're hiding behind technicalities. Now, an IA investigation is not a criminal investigation. That's correct, right?
That's right.
In fact, you can't be criminally charged for it, correct?
That's right.
So you're not under a criminal investigation.
That's right.
You're under an IA investigation, which the result of an IA investigation is you lose your job.
That's right.
Kind of like those little two boys in their career. So, and it conveniently sets up, it's hard to me. And look, I'm trying to really get to the truth. And I really believe, I said it earlier, sunshine, best policy, right? Yeah. And there's something going on. I think everybody can acknowledge there's something going on in state police that's rotten. And when you have the shades drawn in and it's closed up, that thing festers and it stinks and it gets worse and worse and worse. The best thing you do is you open the shades and you let that sunlight kill it all. I'm hearing that y'all want to be the sunshine, but what I'm seeing is you're closing the shades.
No, sir. So
then tell the truth.
I absolutely will, but I have to do it according to the policies and the directives
that were established on the eve of the hearing when you knew you'd be testifying on this.
No, sir, this has been in place.
When did it come in place?
I was served probably March 4th.
So why did IA just get the phones yesterday?
I can't speak to the IA investigation. I have no idea.
And who served you with this?
Colonel Davis.
Okay. March 4th of this year?
Yes, sir.
Okay. That's not that long ago. You acted like that was like some 8 years ago.
I just answered the question, sir. No,
that you made sound like it was really long ongoing investigation. Again, I think the public has a right to know why you wiped your cell phone. I think that is basic. And look, and I'll tell you what I thought was most troubling about your email to me. What you said is, we will update you with the report. You used we.
The department.
I know. I get that. But you're telling me you're being investigated, and you're also telling me that you, inclusive of you, is going to tell me the results of your investigation. And you literally say, trust us. If we trusted you, we wouldn't be here right now. Do you understand that?
Sir, I've been transparent throughout this whole process, and I will continue to be.
Okay. I'm going to return the questions back to Representative Villio. And yeah, that's a very good point. March 4th, the day you got your letter from Colonel Davis, was the exact day we posted our first agenda.
I can't speak to how
You're this number 2 guy. Quit. Look, I have a lot of respect for the officers, the state troopers, but you sitting here and doing that is insulting my intelligence that y'all have not had a conversation. He's 1, you're 2. This is sort of bordering on ridiculous.
Mr. Chairman, the way that happens is I was just called into his office and served.
And And y'all had no prior conversations about cell phones up until that point?
No.
All right, I'm sorry, Representative Dilley, to interrupt you. I really want to interject at the sort of the, I mean, it's almost ludicrous of this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lieutenant Colonel,
Yes, ma'am.
at what point did you not stop to think that by having your phone wiped, you were potentially destroying evidence? Or was that the point?
No, ma'am.
Well, you say no, ma'am, and you look kind of frustrated with my question. So let's go back to 2016 and 2017 when Colonel Edmonston, when they had the Las Vegas side trip investigation. And in fact, phones being wiped clean was the subject of that investigation. Isn't it true?
No, ma'am. I wasn't involved in the investigation. I wasn't on the trip.
Oh, I didn't say you were, but you were the major at that time, were you not?
I was over public affairs.
And didn't you comment to reporters that you were going to look into making sure that there's a policy in place because you agreed that those were public records?
I don't remember that.
I'll be happy to pull up the article when I yield, and we can come back to that. But yes, then Major Cain, now Lieutenant Colonel Cain, number 2, you commented, and that was not so long ago, that you recognized the importance of text messages and not wiping phones clean. In fact, the quote, specific quote too, was, "We certainly recognize this is an issue and we are taking steps to address it." So the steps to address it, Lieutenant Colonel Cain, was yesterday? That's the first step to address what you talked about in 2016 and 2017?
We put a policy in place in this year, or 2020.
It took you 3 years to address it?
Ma'am, I wasn't the head of the agency.
But you said we, again, you said we certainly recognize it's an issue and we are taking steps to address it. But you're not the we?
No, ma'am. I was just a spokesperson.
So you're the we when you want to be the we and not the we when it's good, when it's bad for you. It's just, that's what it seems. Now, isn't it true, Lieutenant Colonel Cain, that you called investigative reporter Chris Nakamoto and asked him not to run a story on Ronald Greene investigation?
Absolutely not true.
So no one directed you to make that call?
It's not true.
You didn't call him?
I did not.
Did you travel with Colonel Lamar Davis, Lieutenant Colonel Chavez Cameron, and Chief Counsel Attorney Faye Morrison to DA John Belton's office on Thursday, May 20th, 2021 to discuss the Greene matter?
At his request.
And were you part of conversations with DA Belton to dissuade him from filing criminal charges against Lieutenant John Clary and Trooper DeMoss and or Corey York?
Absolutely not.
Now, you're aware of Lieutenant Clary's video body camera footage or dash cam footage, some footage from the Ronald Greene incident. You're familiar with the fact that that was mislabeled, correct?
It's my understanding they were correctly labeled.
Really?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so if there was some investigation by Colonel Davis into the mislabeling, but he didn't find enough evidence to consider it intentional as the number 2 guy, you're not aware of that?
Ma'am, I don't recall it being mislabeled.
Okay. So tell me why it didn't get submitted to the DA with the original file.
Say again?
Tell me why it didn't get submitted to DA Belton with the original file.
I wasn't involved in that process.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Did Clary hail from Troop F?
He did.
Right. What about Trooper Jacob Brown? Did he hail from Troop F?
He did.
Now, you were you're aware that in a separate incident, Trooper Jacob Brown was found to have intentionally mislabeled videos in another beating case, correct?
Yes.
So that was able to be determined against Trooper Brown, but not Lieutenant Clary.
Yes.
1 second, Mr. Chair. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Cain, at the time that you were under Colonel Reeves on those weekly meetings, who was under you? Who was your captain?
At what point?
When I asked you about the weekly meetings, and you said that you step out of those meetings after whatever little 7-minute blurb is important to your role in public affairs, I believe. So who was your captain at that time?
I had 2 captains when I was in that position.
Okay, well, go ahead and tell me both captains'
I had
names.
Captain J.B. Slayton was one captain, and Captain Chavez Cameron was the other captain.
And isn't it true, Lieutenant Colonel Cain, that the captains walked out of those weekly meetings, not you?
That's not true. We usually didn't go together. One of us would go and do the brief.
I yield at this time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I'm going to follow up some questions. How does, and I really would like an understanding of this because it's really bothering me. How does the number 1 person in state police investigate the number 2 person in the state police or notify them of that, and then y'all continue to work together?
It's just an allegation that's being looked in. I mean, people continue to work while they're under internal affairs investigations.
Yeah, but you're not like, this is 1 and 2. This isn't guys out on the road being investigated by a supervisor. You're number 2.
Yes, sir.
Do you think it's concerning that the number 2 person in state police is being investigated by IA and is still in their position?
No, sir.
And then, why is that?
Why wouldn't I be in my position?
You could be put on administrative leave pending the results of the investigation. I mean, look, please quit insulting my intelligence. You know those answers. Like, this is getting annoying that you're going to be like, why would I do that? You know why.
We don't put people on administrative leave every time they're under investigation.
Oh, I didn't say every time, but you know what I'm referencing, and you want to be tedious about it. So my point is, why are you not on administrative leave if the only person who can really be your supervisor is the superintendent of state police?
That would be a question for him, sir.
Now, let's talk about the John Clary video. You've seen the John Clary video?
I have.
How'd you see it?
During the internal affairs investigation, probably.
The Paxton investigation?
No, the Clary investigation.
Okay. And you don't show up on the logs as seeing the video?
I was just in a room, so I didn't actually log in, and somebody else logs in and does the briefing.
Who else was in the room?
For the DRC, it would have been Colonel Day, all the lieutenant colonels, legal staff, and IA.
That sounds like a big room.
It is.
How many people were in it?
For a DRC, it can be 12, 13, 14.
And I think one of the biggest problems we have as a modern society is death by acronyms. Can you tell the public what DRC is?
Disciplinary Review Committee.
Okay. So who's in the room now again? I'm sorry, I missed that.
So the Disciplinary Review Committee consists of the lieutenant colonels, the chain of command of the person being investigated, legal, and IA.
Okay. And who is the IA at this time?
Captain Treon Larverdane's the captain, and her lieutenants are usually there, as well as the actual IA investigator that presents the case to the DRC.
Do you remember what date that is?
I don't.
Can you give me an estimate so I can look at the log and figure out what time, who is the person who accessed the video?
For, I guess I said Clary, but I meant Hollingsworth, I think, was the first time that, they played the videos in the Hollingsworth case. That would have been sometime in 2020.
But I'm asking you specifically about the Clary video.
The Clary case, I don't know the time frame of it, but it would have been the Troop F command, the lieutenant colonels, as well as.
I think you're trying to parse out details and answer questions. Not when there's multiple videos of the incident.
Right.
When did you see for the first time? Not when he was being investigated, because you keep saying when he's investigated, and I see the shift of linguistics there. When is the first time you put eyes on the John Clary video? That's my question. It could be in the Hollingsworth investigation, the Moss, any investigation in your lifetime. When is the first time that you saw the John Clary video?
I don't know what video was which. I just know that they showed videos.
So they put you on a review committee and they don't tell you which video you're looking at.
I wasn't on the review committee for Hollingsworth. I wasn't on the review committee until I became chief of staff.
Okay.
Actually a participant.
So when is the first time you became aware that you were watching the John Clary video, the one that did not make it to the DA's office?
I don't know. I don't know the difference between the videos.
Well, good.
At least back then.
DeMoss has one video. It's 46 minutes and 16 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
York has two videos. It's 1 minute and 44 seconds and 33 seconds. Was it one of the York videos?
I remember.
They're short. So did you see a short video or a long video?
They showed a short video and a long video. The first time that I saw videos was that time a few weeks after.
Okay.
And they showed a video of a short one and then one long one.
Okay. So you may have seen a York video, but clearly you saw another video besides a York video.
Yes, sir.
Then you have the Clary videos, which are, there are 3 or 4. There's one that's 2 minutes and 36 seconds. There's one that's 30 minutes and 23 seconds. There's one that's 39 minutes and 17 seconds. Could it be one of those?
It could have been possible, yes, sir.
Okay. And then Hollingsworth has 2 short ones. So those are 4 minutes and 58 seconds and 4 minutes 35 seconds.
Yes, sir.
So if you saw one longer, you would be one of the 30-minute or possibly the DeMoss video, correct?
Yes, sir.
When did you see the first time you saw a video over 5 minutes?
That period 3 weeks or so after the incident.
Now, why were you seeing the video 3 weeks after the incident if you're just in charge of public affairs recruiting and operational development?
For situational awareness, certainly those things are going to be public interest at some point.
Okay. So is it fair to say then that for situational awareness, you were involved in at least some level of the investigation so that you could be aware of what was going on?
Just an observer.
Right. An observer who, what would be the purpose of your observation?
To understand the situation so that we can speak to it when it becomes public.
So right, so it's more than just observing. You have a role to play in this. You're a public affairs officer, so you're being briefed so that you can talk about it if somebody asks you the question.
That's right.
What you're telling me.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you said earlier you just talked to Howard Paxton once. Is it possible you talked to him twice?
He called me once, I called him once.
Okay. Was it in December 23rd of 2020? You talked to him one time?
I don't remember the exact date. I know I called him after the meeting with Representative Belton.
Okay. And then there's also possibly May 24th, 2021. Does that sound right?
Possible.
Do you refer to, or have you referred to the Clary video or not the Clary video, let me say that, the actions of Clary as the Clary mistake?
The what?
The Clary mistake.
No, sir.
You don't believe it was a mistake?
I've never classified it as a mistake.
I didn't say you classified it. Did you ever refer to it?
Not that I'm aware of. No,
Did you
sir.
tell other people that you thought it was a mistake?
No, sir.
You are aware that Officer Clary issued a statement the morning of the incident that left out the actions of the officers as far as use of force?
That was part of an internal investigation, yes, sir.
So you're aware of that?
Yes, sir. Came aware of it this year.
Do you think that was a mistake by John Clary, or do you think it was an intentional act by John Clary?
From the evidence that was presented to us, it was not believed to be an intentional act.
Okay, so then you think it's a mistake?
It was not an intentional act, yes, sir.
What other possibilities are there out there besides a mistake?
Then it was a mistake.
Okay. See how long it took me to get to you to the round of admitting what you already know? It took me 30 questions and dancing to that point. If you just said from the get-go that you think it's a mistake, you could have saved us all 10 minutes. So, you believe then, and it's the position of the department then, that you have a 30-minute incident recorded by John Clary's video that he leaves out in his initial statement to investigators, and you think that was by accident?
We were not able to determine it was not sustained. So
not sustained, what does that mean?
When we looked into the case and his allegations of violations of policy, it was not sustained. It couldn't be proven or disproven.
And I'm asking you, what is the basis of that? Because I see somebody who left out 30 minutes of, I think, any reasonable person of important information in an investigation, and I'm trying to figure out what other conclusion, what was on his side of the ledger that this wasn't intentional. Give me that information.
I don't have that case in front of me, but there were, multiple parts of that investigation conducted by A. There were interviews with multiple individuals involved.
So you're telling me that in the Ronald Greene matter, which has dominated news sources, and as we found out from Colonel Reeves last time, that was one of only 2 incidences, that you need that case file in front of you to tell me why you don't think it was an intentional act and why you think it was a mistake. That's your testimony today.
There were discrepancies in interviews that are relative to that.
As in what discrepancy?
I need to see if I can talk about that case with DPS legal staff.
Okay.
I'm not sure what level I can.
Okay. Are you familiar that the video's been downloaded?
Sir?
Are you familiar that the Clary video's been downloaded?
Right. Yeah, I think all of that is probably a factor in the ongoing investigation and review by DA Belton and federal authorities.
So when Colonel Reeves testified last week that there was no state investigation anymore, that was incorrect? You're disputing Colonel Reeves' assessment of the case?
DA Belton reserves the right to revisit that case.
Sure, but I mean that's any DA could do that for perpetuity. So then everything could always be part of an ongoing state investigation. That's not what we're talking about. Colonel Reeves' assessment was that there was not an ongoing invested state. And are you disputing that today?
There's not an ongoing criminal investigation from state police's point of view, but those investigations are under review by the DA.
And have you talked to the feds and they said that you couldn't talk about that matter today?
Never spoken to the feds.
At all?
No, sir.
Ever?
Ever. Regarding this case.
So you don't know if that's part of the case then or not, or is it just your legal's opinion that it might be part of their investigation?
It could be it's an ongoing investigation.
But, and I want to back that up because I'm not asking about the criminal investigation, feds. I'm actually, now that I'm thinking about it, asking about your investigation of it, which is concluded, right?
Yes, but all of that was probably provided to DOJ. I don't know what the scope of their investigation is. Anything related to the Greene matter and the people involved in that process could potentially be part. So I certainly don't want to get in the way of DOJ or FBI.
Okay. Now, there is a message that I did find concerning. You had a text message conversation with Matthew Block. Is that correct?
I did. Just a response.
Around October 30th of 2020.
Yes.
You recall that? And you said something that concerned me, which was, and it might be completely innocent. Reached out to Edmund Jordan, who's to my left, this evening, working to earn his trust and confidence. I think we had a good initial conversation, and we plan to meet again in person later this week. Do you remember that?
I do. I believe that was the day I was appointed, and I had heard that Representative Jordan, who I had never met, had concerns about my appointment. So, rather than discount it or blow it off, I proactively reached out to Representative Jordan, introduced myself, offered to meet with him, and continue to communicate.
And what was your appreciation of his concerns about your appointment?
I don't know. That's why I called to see if I could answer any questions he may have.
And okay, did y'all end up meeting later that week?
We did. I believe we met at some point.
And it's been referenced a couple of times in here. You also had a conversation about another text message with Matthew Block regarding a separate brutality incident, or use of force incident, I should say.
I think he asked a question and I responded.
Yes. And do you remember what that question was?
I don't. I think it was with regards to one of the Troop F cases, I believe, that we initiated and investigated.
It was at the Bowman case?
It could have been, yes, sir.
And that was, what time frame was that?
I don't remember.
And do you recall what happened?
He asked a question and I responded. I think he was asking what had we done with this case or something to that effect.
I guess my question is, did you have regular conversations about trooper discipline cases with him?
No, sir.
This was the only one?
I've had a couple, but not many. I'm mostly dealt with the press staff.
Okay. And when you deal with the press staff, what does that mean?
Christina is the communications director. If there's something that I need to give her a heads up on, I'll call her and let her know.
Okay. Were you involved in the investigation of, and I want to get this correct, Jacob Brown?
I was the chief of staff when we initiated that investigation.
And Officer Brown had mislabeled videos?
Yes, sir.
And he intentionally had done that?
Yes, sir.
And so he was ultimately, what was his ultimate conclusion?
He was arrested and terminated.
In what time frame did that case happen? Do you know?
I don't.
So how do you get that information of what his discipline was? How do you collect it, and how do you put it back out to anybody who would ask?
That matter continues to be under investigation, Mr. Chairman.
He's been arrested.
Yes, sir.
And he's been terminated.
Yes, sir.
At what point do y'all consider investigations concluded?
Until the feds determine we can speak to it.
Do they notify you via some sort of written communication? Maybe it's a question for the next witness, but I'll get beyond that. I'm going to turn it over to some other people to speak now. Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I'm not big on movie references, but I thought Mr. Cain would get up there and tell you that you couldn't handle the truth. So we'll see what happens here. But let's start with this. I want to make sure, Lieutenant Colonel, right?
Yes, sir.
I want to make sure I address you appropriately. So let's talk. And I know Representative Villio talked about you being less than transparent, well, I guess with Mr. Nakamoto on the Ronald Greene matter, but it really wasn't Ronald Greene, it was August McKay, right?
I was not less than transparent.
All right. Well, let's say it like this. It was reported that you didn't want him to run the story on August McKay, correct?
That's inaccurate.
That's inaccurate?
Yes, it was reported, but it was reported inaccurately.
No, but I'm just saying that was the report.
Yes, sir.
And so, because I want to get at least the elephant out of the room as it relates to you and I, and then we can get on with the rest of the business. And I did have some concerns, right? I had some concerns, and the concerns were really about the lack of what I perceived as a lack of transparency, correct?
I don't know what your concerns were.
Lieutenant Colonel. Now, you just said we met, right?
Yeah, and we've
Right.
had an open dialogue.
That's right.
over the
And
course of the last 15
and
months.
did I not express to you that I had concerns about that? And that led to my concerns. And somebody that would be the number two and would be less than transparent was a concern of mine, right?
And I offered to meet with you at any time and speak
Right.
to
Well, but that's fine. But let's not act like I didn't tell you what the concerns were. You knew what the concerns were before you met with me. We knew that I had concerns about the appointment because I had the perception that you would be less than transparent, right? Based on what was reported in the August McKay matter.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay, well, I mean, look, let's not act like we didn't have this conversation. We don't have to go around this. I was there just like you were there.
Yes, sir.
I was part of the conversation.
Yes, sir.
All right. So, and I was very clear about it. So I don't think I left anything to doubt when we talked about it. Now, that being said, I will tell you that based on the testimony I heard last week from Colonel Reeves and what I'm hearing today, I still share some of those concerns. Now, you said that you saw the first time you saw this video, anything related to Ronald Greene, was a few weeks after it happened.
Yes, sir.
So this has been the end of May?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this happened before the George Floyd. You saw the video before the George Floyd incident.
I don't remember when George Floyd was.
Well, George Floyd was after that. So
Okay. Yes.
let's work with that.
Yes.
Now, but as part of public affairs, I assume you review statements, you help craft statements or anything, something to that effect before the colonel will put them out, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. So I'm going to read you the statement from Colonel Reeves as it relates to the death of George Floyd. And he says, I've been asked by family, friends, colleagues, and members of the community to share my thoughts in response to the tragic death of George Floyd. Generally speaking, Louisiana State Police has avoided commenting on police actions by other agencies. That job historically has been left to the court system. However, the last 2 weeks have demonstrated that these are different times which require us to respond differently. And this is some of these other quotes. Let me be clear. Police brutality in any form undermines the good work in public service and constitutional policing performed by the Louisiana State Police, along with our law enforcement professionals across our state and our country. Incidents of police brutality, such as George Floyd, shock the conscience and questions the basic humanity of those who violate our solemn oath. This misconduct undermines the public trust in law enforcement and chips away at the very foundation of public safety and service. The Louisiana State Police takes pride in our processes, our training, and the work of our troopers. We are committed to recruiting, training, and retaining the most professional law enforcement officers in the state. And then he goes on to talk about some of the things that you guys do as far as racial profiling, training, community engagement, and all that. And then he talks about some of the protests. But at the very end, he says, police brutality will never be tolerated by the Louisiana State Police, and we hold ourselves accountable for violations of the public trust. We will listen to and address the concerns of the people we serve. And then he goes on to say how he's grateful and thankful. Now, my question to you is, how could you let a statement go out like this, talking about the brutality and the lack of accountability in Minnesota, knowing that you had seen this Ronald Greene video and knowing that some of our same officers were just as guilty of brutality, still had the same lack of accountability, and here we are today and still not getting full accountability. You reviewed that statement before it went out. How could you let that go out, knowing the things that you knew at the time that this statement went out?
We had an ongoing investigation at that time.
You had seen the video, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. So I'm not asking you to make comparisons because George Floyd video was bad. Ronald Greene's video was bad. I'm not asking you which one was worse. They're both horrible. But knowing that, well, let's back up. Do you agree with that? Do you agree that the Ronald Greene video was horrible?
It's tragic any time life is taken. But
That's not what I'm asking you. It's not what I'm asking you. I'm asking, did you think it was horrible? Did you think that it was reprehensible, the actions taken by the officers that night?
I'm going to defer to the investigation on that. I don't want to speak.
I'm not asking what the investigation says. I'm asking for your personal opinion.
I'm not going to give a personal opinion with an ongoing investigation, Representative Jordan.
Okay. I'll take that then. Anytime you say that, I'm going to take that to say that you didn't think it was.
That's unfair.
Well, I'm going to be unfair today. So you can, because here it is. You're sitting here. You have an opportunity for me to be as fair as you want me to be. So if you're not going to answer it, I'm going to assume the worst. Because if it wasn't, you would say so.
Anybody who would see that video would be troubled by that video.
All right. So you were troubled by the video.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So as troubling, let's use that word, as troubling as that video was, how then could you let a statement go out like this, knowing that you yourself had a troubling video within your own shop?
Because there was an ongoing investigation.
All right. Look. I don't want to keep going back and forth with this, but I am for a minute. At the very beginning, he said, let me be clear. Police brutality in any form undermines the good work in public service and constitutional policing performed by Louisiana State Police. And he says, incidents of police brutality, such as George Floyd, shock the conscience and question the basic humanity of those who violate our solemn oath. If I replace the name George Floyd with Ronald Greene, would you say that the actions of those officers that night shocked the conscience and questioned the basic humanity of those who violate your solemn oath?
I can't speak for their actions.
Well, here's the thing that's surprising to me, and it really is about you and Colonel Reeves. You guys act like y'all can't read a witness list. You know we got other people coming after you, right?
Yes, sir.
You know, I'm looking at Albert Paxton right there. You know Paxton is going to speak, right?
Yes.
You know Scott Davis is going to speak, right?
Sure.
Okay, and so you act like that you can sit here and, like Representative McGee said, just insult our intelligence like we're not going to find out what else is going on? That people have a different opinion?
I don't know that any of us can speak to anything regarding an ongoing investigation.
Look, I hear you. I tell you what. All right. So, what conversations did you have after watching that video, and what directives in your role at that time as dealing over public affairs and whatever the other role you had, did you give command staff from a public affairs perspective? So, two questions. After watching that video, what conversations did you have with anybody at State Police?
No conversations other than just monitoring and seeing if we had any public responses. But with an ongoing investigation, we can't push out any information. We can't release any information. We're trying to do a better job of that now, and I believe we are. But with an ongoing investigation, it's customary for us not to do any more information release with an ongoing investigation.
All right. Did you ever have a conversation with Colonel Reeves about the arresting or possible arrest or not arresting Hollingsworth after watching this video?
No, sir, I did not.
You did not?
I didn't have any conversations with him.
Okay. Did you have a conversation with anybody
No, sir.
after watching the video about whether Hollingsworth should be arrested?
No, sir.
Okay. And anybody who says differently, you would contradict that?
Yeah,
You
I didn't have
disagree with
anything
it?
to do with the investigation.
I didn't ask if you had anything to do with the investigation. My question was, did you have any conversations with anybody about it?
Not that I recall. I wouldn't have
Now
had
it's
any
not
reason
that you
to.
recall. Okay. What conversations did you have with Colonel Reeves or anybody else about York after watching that video?
None
None.
that I recall.
Okay.
I wouldn't have had any reason to speak to it.
All right. Did you ever comment or communicate with anybody about this Ronald Greene matter via text?
No, sir. Not that I recall. I know I've received text.
Okay. So how was your response after you received the text? Once you received the text, did you give a call back?
But I screenshot the text, so there's a legal hold. So we have a screenshot of the text so that it's recovered.
All right. Did you make any phone calls in response to a text?
With regard to what?
To the Ronald Greene matter.
The Ronald Greene matter's been going on for years, sir. I've had conversations regarding, the incident.
Okay. How long were you in public affairs?
I was served in various capacities over course of 10 years, 12 years.
12 years. Tell me what are some of the best practices as it relates to litigation holds and sanitizing of public records and all this. As a public affairs director or some responsibility for being over that, you should know some of those things, correct?
The laws regarding public records?
Well, not just the laws. I'm just saying some of the best practices, some of the things that you should and shouldn't do. You would be familiar with those things as well, wouldn't you?
With regards to
With
what's your
regards
question, sir?
to records retentions, with regards to sanitation of your the sanitizing of your phone, any of those things.
Can you clarify the question?
Report, don't you understand?
That's when I repeated. Can I just repeat it?
Can you repeat the question?
Certainly. All right. So I asked you about some of the best practices. You said you were in public affairs for 10 to 12 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I said you would be familiar with some of the best practices as it relates to record retentions, correct?
We
That's a yes or no question. Either you were or you weren't.
no.
You're not familiar with records retention. Look, hold on. I don't need you whispering in his ear, Miss Holland, with all due respect. Yeah, I don't want you answering for him. Let him answer for himself.
We rely on the legal counsel to advise us on laws that affect
It's not what I'm asking you. It's not what I'm asking. That's like anybody that's in some professional field, whether it's somebody that's involved in safety, somebody that's involved in human resources, somebody that's involved in a multitude of disciplines. Things change over time. There are some best practices about how you do your job, right? So you're telling me you're not familiar with some of the best practices on how to perform your job?
Miss
I'm not
Holland
asking, you don't have to look at her for that. Either you know some of the best practices on how to do your job, or you don't.
Public records is a legal question.
You are a public affairs person, right?
I was.
All right. And you're telling me you never had any training or anything whatsoever, attended any seminars, any conferences, nothing that dealt with how you should deal with public records or retention.
All those are processed through legal.
That's not what I asked you.
I
just
never
asked
received any training.
Okay, so you never received any training. So you're not familiar with any of that stuff. So you don't know what the best practices are for that.
We rely on legal to advise us.
All right. And so you don't speak. So let me ask you this. Is it that you don't speak on any state police ongoing investigations, or is it that you don't speak on any ongoing investigations?
We don't speak on ongoing investigations.
Okay. So when the colonel made that statement about George Floyd, was that not an ongoing investigation at that time?
He didn't speak to the specifics of the case.
Okay. So But that's interesting you say that, because when I gave a characterization of what he said and asked you what you thought about the video, you said you don't speak to an ongoing investigation. I wasn't asking you to speak as to the specifics of it at the time. I asked you what you thought about it.
I said it was horrifying.
Well, prior to that, though, you said, you said it was troubling. I'm
Right,
glad you
troubling.
I'm glad you do believe it's horrifying, because I find it horrifying too. I'm glad we agree. We can get to that point. But he spoke to an ongoing investigation, right?
Right.
Okay. But you just said that we don't speak to any ongoing investigations.
Not regarding the circumstances of it.
All right. So as long as we don't ask you about the specific circumstances of a video that the whole world has seen, but as long as we don't ask you about those specific circumstances and just get your impressions of them, we're okay with that, right?
I believe, sir, you asked me about the actions of the officers, which would be part of the
Well, I
investigation.
asked you to characterize them.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
That's what I didn't respond to.
But in that George Floyd video, he basically responded to the actions of those officers. In fact, he uses the words actions in his statement. The actions of those officers. And that's exactly what he says. I could go back and read it, but I'm not. I mean, we've done it twice. So you're willing to talk about the actions of the officers in an ongoing investigation in somebody else's case, which you said we don't talk about any of them, but you really did, but you're not willing to do it as it relates to your own house. Is that what you're telling me? Well, you don't have to look at her for that. I mean, I'm assuming she can't.
I don't understand your question.
Okay. All right. Don't worry about it. Hey, look, it's me today. That's fine. Let me ask you this. In the Alton Sterling matter, I think there was a directive at that time. I remember there was a directive to keep all email and phone records. Do you remember that as well?
No, sir.
Okay, you don't. All right, but if I told you there was, then you wouldn't dispute that,
No,
since
sir.
you don't. All right. But I assume that policy went away at some point.
I don't know if it was a policy or a legal hold. I
Okay.
wasn't involved in that case.
All right. Let me ask you this: if you know, did you and Colonel Reeves and Mike Noel all turn your phones in around the same time or the same date?
I can't speak to that with the investigation, but I certainly will provide that during the course of that investigation.
Well, I guess the question is, do you know even?
I don't know when they turned their phones in.
Okay. You know, we just did some ethics and some harassment training just last week. And do you guys do that type of training as well?
Yes, sir, annually.
Annually. Okay. You know, I was surprising to me. I think the ladies that came in and they were saying like things that could be offensive and people could object to. And I think they said one of those, I don't know if Representative McGee remembers this, but they talked about one of the lamps. Like, you remember the lamps with the leg, like a lady's leg exposed or what have you? And they said, you know, people came in and they said they found that offensive. And I was like, okay, well, whatever. I mean, if, you know, let me ask you though, in your role under Colonel Reeves, were you ever exposed to Bob Brown? I mean, did you have conversations with him as well?
Not very often. He was chief of staff for a short time.
All right, short time. Did you ever visit him in his office?
I'm sure I saw him in his office.
All right. Did he have any type of flags in his office, anything like that?
No, sir, not that I
No
saw.
flags.
Not that I recall.
Okay. So if somebody said he did and it was well known, you would dispute that and disagree with that as well?
I didn't see anything.
You didn't see it. Well, was it there or you just kind of closed your eyes when you went in?
I don't know what you're referring to, Representative Jordan.
Okay. All right. Let me ask you a few other questions. I understand that these phones are now with IA, including your phone, right?
That's what I've been told, but I'm not aware of it.
Okay. Do you know if you're a witness or a target of an IA investigation?
I'm a target, I assume.
You're a
I was
target,
served by the colonel
Okay. And it said the letter said you were a target?
regarding sanitization of phones.
Okay.
I don't know that it uses the word target.
Okay. But that's what you assume. All right.
Yes,
No
sir.
problem. No problem. As it relates to Clary, did you ever have any conversations with him before his internal affairs hearing?
No, sir.
All right. So if somebody said that you coached or advised Clary before the hearing, you would dispute that as
Completely
well.
false.
Completely false.
Absolutely false.
Okay. You said the allegations against Clary weren't sustained. It was not sustained, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. Was Albert Paxton called at that hearing?
I think that's all part of the ongoing investigation.
Not what I'm asking you. Was he called at the hearing?
He was interviewed.
That's not what was he called?
Was he called
Was he called to testify for the hearing?
for the DRC?
Yes.
So the parties of the investigation are not there. What happens is the internal affairs investigator comes in and briefs the DRC on the case, and then a deliberation occurs, and then the superintendent makes a decision on discipline. So they don't actually come in, but he was part of the
He
investigation.
was part of the
As
investigation,
far as I recall, yes, sir.
as you recall. All right. Now you saw that video related to Ronald Greene. You saw the video multiple times, right?
I did, yes, sir.
All right. Did you ever try to convince anyone that the video wasn't as bad as it appeared, or that the officer's actions weren't as bad as it may have seemed?
No, sir.
Okay. You didn't try to convince anyone that criminal charges shouldn't be brought against any of the officers?
Absolutely not. It's not my determination.
That's not what I asked you, though.
I said absolutely not.
Okay. Good enough. And so if somebody said that, again, we call in other witnesses. If somebody comes in and says that you did, then you're going to dispute that.
Absolutely.
Okay. You didn't come out of Troop F, did you?
I did not.
All right. Let me ask you this, though. Let me ask you kind of the same thing I asked Colonel Reeves last week. We had this Ronald Greene case come out of Troop F, right?
Yes, sir.
Colonel Reeves came out of Troop F, right?
Yes, sir.
Bob Brown came out of Troop F, correct?
Yes, sir.
Jacob Brown was in Troop F, right?
Yes, sir.
This Bowman case is out of Troop F, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. We've got all these things, and we can agree that there's some racial component to all of this, right?
Criminal component, absolutely.
Well, but a racial component, a racial element to this, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. And then we know that as it relates to August McKay, that the allegations surrounding him, we know what it was. He left his phone on and he said some racist language, right?
Yes, sir.
And this stuff was accepted. You know, it's just hard for me to understand how we could have some people that are in leadership of state police and tolerate such actions. It just seems that there was a lot of tolerance for racial animus in the Reeves administration.
I wasn't involved in the August McKay case.
No, but you did have some conversation with Mr. Nakamoto related to it, however accurate or inaccurate it was portrayed. And in fact, wasn't there some discussion about having his name redacted from some of the documents before they were made public?
I don't recall, but yes, there was.
I thought there was.
Yeah, and I think we talked about that case when we
did.
met. Yeah.
We did. And so, you know, not only tolerance, but trying to give some of those guys who acted in that manner some cover,
No, sir.
so as not to be exposed. Well, that's what it was. If you wanted to redact his name, I mean,
That was protect the integrity of the process, the
Well-
EEO process.
well, I mean, there was a audio here. I mean, there was a full audio version that was already out. I mean, I think that horse was out of the barn already.
And we did release it, yes, sir.
I know you did, but that wasn't your initial reaction. The initial reaction was to cover it up,
No, sir.
to hide it,
No, sir.
to redact it, which is hiding it, which is covering it up. So,
You have to explain this.
And
Go ahead.
Representative Jordan, in all fairness, and we spoke about that case, our concern was the integrity of the EEO process. If you release details related to an EEO complaint, then we believe that it would make people hesitant to come forward with further complaints because it would play out in the media in a public space. That's a very personal process for somebody who's been a victim of a EEO or perceived victim of a EEO. So that was the context I explained to you, was we did not want to diminish the integrity of the EEO process and make it uncomfortable for people to come forward with a complaint, that they can be comfortable, come forward, make a complaint, it's going to be investigated, there's going to be a finding, and there's going to be action based on that finding.
and I understand that, but it's hard for me to just believe that you were doing it in the best. And this is me talking, in the best interest of the alleged victim here, or the victim. Let me not say it, but I mean, he was a victim in this matter, and so I understand your explanation. But I will tell you the lack of transparency. I'm going to use the words obstruction that we've received from you and Colonel Reeves in this matter is of concern. And I understand. I mean, did you? Well, let me just last question. Did you sign a non-disclosure agreement in this matter?
No, sir.
All right. Was one ever presented for your signature?
No, sir.
All right. Do you know of anyone who has?
No, sir.
All right. I have Ms. Holland now. I might as well ask you: Have you ever prepared or drafted a non-disclosure agreement as it relates to the Ronald Greene matter?
I have.
Okay. For what purpose?
Wait, hold on, let's. Yeah, her microphone's not tested on. She's not a witness. I do.
That's okay.
I want to make sure that I'm okay with you asking the question. But a couple things. We'll do a little housekeeping in between. Appropriations has graciously added us to their lunch list. So if anybody here who wants to eat lunch, we'll have it available. And it's part of the appropriations lunch. Second thing, moving forward to try and get us along, we're going to do a 10-minute time limit on each person's questionings. But I think it's an important question to Mrs. Holland, who was not a witness today, but she asked a question and she did decide to answer it. So I'm going to let her finish it and explain it, and then we'll kind of move on from
And I'm
there.
done after that.
All right. Ms. Holland, I think the question to you is, have you drafted a non-disclosure agreement as it relates to the Ronald Greene matter?
Yes.
And I was saying, for what purpose?
That's attorney-client privilege.
All right. And we also need a card for you since you are testifying. Please fill out a card.
I'm done. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And just quickly, before I move on to Representative Marcel, the email you sent me yesterday and notify me, did you consult with anybody to draft that email?
I spoke to the colonel and Miss Gale.
Who's Ms. Gale?
Solid.
Thank you. And please don't tell me what Ms. Gale told you. That's definitely attorney-client privileged. Did they review said email?
Yes.
Okay. My concern is that I'm not sure why it didn't come from either legal or from the colonel. It seems odd to me that you would notify me that you're being investigated and you would establish the parameters of what you can and cannot say. But anyway, we've covered that enough. The letter you received, your target letter, the target letter you received, can you provide a copy to the committee?
Is that public? Is it the target letter? That I received.
He's in control of
You
it.
can talk about it. You can.
Okay.
Not the investigation.
Yes?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. And finally, were you in meetings and even outside the Ronald Greene matter with Colonel Reeves?
I attended meetings with him occasionally as staff.
Did you see him? Back on. Did you see him write notes in a notebook during those meetings?
At times, I'd see him take notes. Yes, sir.
Into a specific notebook or to specific notebooks with an S?
No, sir. Just
Was he known to carry a notebook with him pretty much all the time?
he carried a notebook and took notes. I don't know if it was the same or different or.
Okay, thank you. Representative Marcel with a question.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today,
Yes, ma'am.
Lieutenant Cain. I've waited patiently to ask just a couple of questions, but I just want to make sure everybody understands that we were commissioned here today to get the answers that we believe were so much needed for the public, to restore the trust back in the state police, to give answers as it relates to Ronald Greene's death to his family, which they are deserving. And I'm just appalled at the lack of answers that you all are willing to give us today. Hiding behind investigations, someone giving a notice on March 4th, the day that we convened. I think all that stuff is convenient. I think it shows a lack of transparency, and it gives more questions and pause to this community and the state to restore the trust that we just came here to find out the truth. We didn't come here to badger any one particular person. I know for myself I didn't. But I'm actually upset of the lack of transparency. And so let me just quickly, because I don't want to be the 40 minutes that my colleague was. So let me quickly ask you a couple of questions.
Yes, ma'am.
One, how long have you been with the state police?
24 and a half years.
24 and a half years.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
You talked about the video extensively, and well, not really extensively. You were asked a bunch of questions extensively about the video, the Clary video, and you can't tell us when you first viewed that video. You said it was multiple videos. How many videos did you see, and how many videos that you currently know are out there?
I believe that's part of the ongoing investigation.
I understand that, but we called you here to get some answers. So,
Yes, ma'am.
how many videos have you currently seen? That's the first question. I think you said two. I don't want to put words in.
I've seen videos in various venues, so I don't know.
In various venues.
ma'am.
And you don't know whether it was the Clary video, the Hollingsworth video. You don't know all of this investigation and ongoing irregularities as it relates to Ronald Greene's death. You don't know at this point, at this juncture, 3 years later, how many videos you viewed. That's what you want the
I'm
public
sure
to
I've
believe.
seen all of them.
You've seen all of them.
Yes.
And how many is it, sir?
I believe there's 5.
It's 5. But initially, I think you made mention that you saw 2, and you said that your name did not appear, because I asked this question to Colonel Reeves when he said that was, I don't think he remembered the policy or something for Axon, because I called you guys when I was doing the policy for Baton Rouge City Police body cameras. So I know that Axon would tell you when a person logged in. And what you said here today is that your name didn't appear on the list because you were just in the room.
Yes, ma'am.
And the level of people that are in the room were what? Lieutenants, captains, majors, who?
A mixture. Yes, ma'am.
It was a mixture. Approximately how many people was in that room?
10 the first time.
10.
10 to 12.
So about 10 people. So it's only going to show, Axon is only going to show one person's name as looking at that video. Is that accurate?
That situation in a briefing situation.
In a
yes,
briefing
ma'am.
situation. But there is information of who was in the room, right? State police knows who was in that initial room, right?
The people in the room would know, yes, ma'am.
No. So you all don't keep any records of when you're having briefings, who attends those briefings or who's in those rooms? Or y'all just have them and anybody can come, or what? Somebody would know at the head, either Reeves or somebody would have the information of who was in the room on that particular day, correct?
We don't keep a log or a
You don't keep a
sign
log?
in. No, ma'am. Not for meetings.
Okay. So speaking on as it relates to the video, and you're saying that the disciplinary review committee, you were on that?
I was in the room, but I was not a party to the
That's
committee.
the one that you're talking about. That was the initial one, and that was about 3 weeks later. Is
The
that
initial one wasn't a DRC. That was just a viewing of the video.
so? You were in the initial meeting and the DRC meeting. So that's at least twice that we know you saw it, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And once you saw the video, you have knowledge. You've been there 24 plus years, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Of the policies and procedures of use of force. Is that accurate?
Yes, ma'am.
And what an officer should and should not do, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And particularly when there's a crash report, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And there are certain things that state police says that you have to do in policy, and you're familiar with those accurately. Is that accurate?
I haven't done a crash report in a long time, but in general, yes, ma'am.
But in general,
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
So you know that you're supposed to talk to the witnesses. You're supposed to take photos of the scene. You know that the stuff that you, particularly when there's a fatality, there's additional stuff that you have to do. Is that accurate? It's not just a regular report when it's a
Right.
fatality,
Yes,
correct?
ma'am.
Or when it's alleged that it's a fatality by a crash. Because that's what we're finding out now, correct?
If there's a fatality crash, it's a more extensive investigation.
It's a more extensive. So you're aware of that. Are you also aware of anything about cleaning or what do y'all call it? Sanitizing your phone, wiping your phone. You don't recall when you wipe your phone. Can you tell me why you wipe your phone? I think Colonel Reeves sat here and told us why he wiped his. So I'm just trying to figure out what's any different than your phone than his.
Well, he's no longer an employee, ma'am.
He's
So
no longer an
I'm
employee.
bound by the
And-
rules of the department and directives.
And what
of
does
the
those
department.
rules say about giving this testimony about your phone?
It says that I'm specifically prohibited from not only speaking to the investigation, but even acknowledging investigation.
So you just broke the rule by acknowledging the investigation,
It was
right?
it
So y'all
was-
break the rules at state police sometimes when it's convenient. Is that accurate?
It was posed by the committee, ma'am.
Right, but we also posing to ask you this question about cleaning of your phones, and particularly what during the Alton Sterling murder. Do you recall that? You were there because you've been there 24 years, right?
I was at state police, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you recall that there was an order that went out to retain all of your information?
No, ma'am.
You
I don't know
don't.
if there was a legal hold.
The retention. It was not a legal hold. There was an order that went out after Alton Sterling because I was involved in that as well.
Yeah, I was not, ma'am.
You weren't involved in it, but an order went out to do a retention to establish it as it relates to the records
I'm not
and
aware
body
of it.
cameras.
I'm not aware of that.
You're not aware of that. Are you also not aware of how many times that Mr. Clary viewed his video?
I am not.
You're not? You didn't have an opportunity to look over it?
I don't remember if that was part of the IA investigation or not. I don't recall.
You seem to have a lapse in memory today.
Ma'am, I'll be happy to get the case and review it. That was
Yeah.
months ago.
Right, but you knew that you were coming here today to answer these questions. And that's what's insulting to us.
Ma'am, I don't know what questions y'all are going to ask.
We're going to ask you questions about the death of Ronald
I
Greene
can
and
assure
the
you-
investigation surrounding it, sir.
If there's any pending questions, we'll get the answers for you.
There are a lot of pending questions. But you're hiding behind the fact that there is an investigation that the colonel, the number one person, gave to you on March 4th, the day that we convened our first meeting. That's very convenient, sir. It's also convenient to me that Clary, you, all of y'all sanitize your phones around the same time, just coincidentally, and now we can't talk about it. So what's the purpose of us being here if we can't discuss anything or get to the bottom of what really happened? Who are we covering up for, sir? That's what I want to know.
Ma'am, you'll have access to that investigation. I'm certain of it.
And 3 years later, we don't have any answers. We don't have any concrete answers to any of this, right?
The state police investigation was completed. We're waiting for
The state police investigation was completed. And in your opinion, after watching the very disturbing video, do you believe that any officer that participated in that murder of Ronald Greene should still be an officer? That's the question. Or should they have been disciplined more? Or what is your thoughts on the video after seeing the video? Because you keep talking about how the policy is there and how this is that, and you're not really answering the questions. You know what I'm saying? The violation of the policy. But can you just tell us what you think? You've been there 24 years. You know, if somebody asks me what I think about a piece of legislation, it may not be my legislation, and I might not be hands-on on it, and it might be being investigated, but I can give my opinion. Your opinion is your opinion. Do you believe that those officers should have been dealt with who covered up what happened initially in the crash? That's why we're here. Because if they wouldn't have covered it up, if they wouldn't have written the wrong report that you say that you believe is a mistake and not a cover-up, then we wouldn't even be here. But if they would have told what really happened, then somebody would have lost their job, right?
It would be inappropriate for me to comment or provide my
It's
personal
inappropriate.
opinion to an ongoing investigation.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Do you consider yourself a friend to Clary?
I know Clary, but we work in different parts of the state.
Do you consider yourself a friend to him?
He's a friend. I'm friends with
Okay,
him.
there we go. There we go. He's a friend. So you would not like to see him lose his job. You really don't want to see Miss Clary lose his job, do you, sir?
The facts will bear out, ma'am.
I'm not talking about the facts. I'm talking about you as a friend. You don't want to see your friend lose their job.
If anybody breaks the law or policy within the department, they should be held accountable, regardless of who they are.
And so that means that any officer, if this investigation bears out that any officer covered up anything on the onset of this investigation, they should be removed, correct?
Absolutely, if the facts bear that out.
Okay. and
Representative Marcel, we're at the chairman's
at-
imposed 10 minutes, so if you could
I
wrap
put
it
the
up.
10 minutes on us, and so now I'm victim to it.
Yeah, if you can just wrap it up soon.
No, I mean, I just think it's a travesty that we're sitting here going over and over and over the same questions, and we're not getting any answers. There's no transparency. It's making it worse than what it already was.
Representative Marcel, I would just offer, if you look at the last 15 months since Colonel Davis and I and our team, I mean, we have worked diligently to change policies and procedures.
Yeah, like
enhance
giving you a
training.
letter on March the 4th not to tell us what's going on. Like that, right? We can use that as Exhibit A. Thank you.
Representative Bacala.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Congratulations on your promotion.
Thank you.
You know, as we go through this, I think most of us said early on that we're trying to find facts that allow us to draw a reasonable conclusion about what happened. And now as we get into the actual meat of this thing, we're finding out that facts are not going to be made available to us because of whatever reasons, ongoing investigation. And it's policy, and I know you're talking about policy. You know, there are other policies in the manual that I'm looking at excerpts from. It would be things like doing anything that brings the department or any of its subdivisions into disrepute. It's doing things that may reasonably be expected to destroy the public respect for your department. And it's things like anything that tends to undermine the operations. So I think there's conflict within your own policy. By pursuing the policy of not answering questions, you're creating other issues, which brings the department into disrepute, quite frankly. And we hear it when we leave these doors. I was pretty darn excited when this committee was announced that the response from the governor's office is, I welcome the investigation. I look forward to transparency, and I can't quote everything. But that statement, now we get here and we find out that we're going to get more I can't answer that question than answers. And I would suggest, and I think, Lieutenant Colonel, if your colonel gave you permission to answer these questions, you could, right?
Yes, sir.
If the governor directed the colonel to instruct everybody, we're opening this thing up to transparency, it would happen, correct?
Yes, sir.
I think if we're going to truly try to collect all the facts necessary to draw accurate conclusions, we're going to have something like that. Because as long as we can only find out half of the facts, we can come only to half the truth, and our conclusions will be much more inaccurate than if we had all the facts, which is allow us to draw accurate conclusions. So I will say this publicly, and I do not ask your comment necessarily. If we want the truth, we got to get it.
Okay, then.
I allowed y'all to confer. Is there something you'd like to communicate?
No, sir.
Okay. All right. So let's go back. Let's go back to the basic question, and one that the basic question of when did you first see the video? Where did you see it? Who was present? And what was the discussion? I know y'all didn't walk out the room and say, okay, we're not going to talk about what we just saw.
No, sir. As I said, I saw it about 3 weeks after the incident with the senior staff. But
who is the senior staff?
With the lieutenant colonels. But the discussion and outcome is part of an ongoing investigation.
Well, that again, we're going back to that policy that keeps us from receiving the transparency here that we need to draw conclusions. And again, I think answering the questions is better for all involved, including the reputation of state police, than to continuing to say we can't answer that question because we have an internal investigation. It seems to me, quite frankly, and tell me if I'm wrong, is there an internal investigation going on of the internal investigation that was originally done?
Sir, if I can try to give some perspective, I don't know the scope of the federal investigation. And the last thing that I want to put myself in a position to do is get in the way of that. My general understanding is that is a broad investigation encompassing everything as it relates to this case. So for me to speak to anything could put me in jeopardy of whatever DOJ and the FBI has going on. I don't know what they're looking into, but I would assume that it's wide-ranging.
I would respect the fact that we don't want to impair an investigation by the FBI. My understanding is the FBI investigation had to do with events on the scene that night and people who are directly involved. When we make statements like this, it implies that now there's going to be an implication when we say things like that the FBI has got everybody at the administrative level of state police in their crosshairs. And I don't think that's accurate. So I think we can't, at some point we have to say, you know what, it's in order to ensure that trust is restored, we have to be transparent. In order to be transparent, we have to start hiding. We have to remove the barrier of we're not answering questions because of, and that's a statement more to question. But again, you know, we asked simply, what was the discussion after the first viewing of the meeting, and we can't even find that. We can't even see what the opinions were. And again, it certainly would seem like, you know, the initial IA investigation is under investigation. The criminal investigation that was conducted is under an investigation of whether it was done properly. So I think everything that was done in the first months apparently is under scrutiny. It's not just the actions of the officers on the street, but it's the actions of those. You're doing it. I'm reading between the lines. You're investigating the investigators.
I believe that to be the case. There's been an allegation of a cover-up, so I would assume that the federal government has a wide-ranging scope with regards to everything involving this investigation, not only the night of the incident, but all the subsequent actions that followed.
Well, I thank you, and I'll turn the mic over, but I would implore you guys to seek permission or instruction to share all relevant facts with this committee. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bacala. And just to break quickly, you recall a meeting with DA Belton around May 20th of 2021, correct?
I don't know the exact date, but yeah, sure, if you say that's when it is.
I believe Colonel Davis was there, and Colonel Kamen was there, and Faye Morrison was there.
Yes, sir, that would have been the meeting he requested.
Right. There's, I think, an allegation or some innuendo at least that you were describing that being angry, that District Attorney Belton was even thinking about prosecuting. Is that an accurate interpretation of how your conduct was in that meeting?
No, sir, and you know, I let DA Belton speak to that, and we have and continue to cooperate with that investigation.
No, sure. This is why we're doing this, an opportunity to clear everything up. So if anybody said that you were angry at the idea of prosecuting Lieutenant Clary, that would be inaccurate. That person would not be telling the truth.
Yes.
Thank you. Representative Landry.
Hello. I just have a few questions. I had stepped out at some point, so you may have answered a couple of these. But just to clarify, you said you're unable to speak about the cell phone internal investigation. Was it your attorney sitting next to you who instructed you not to speak about it?
No, ma'am. In the notification letter, it is clear.
Okay, so I don't have it
Yeah,
in front of me. I think you just sent it last night. If you remember what you wrote in it.
I can probably pull it up.
Sure, yes. I apologize. I don't have a paper copy because of the recent time that it was received.
Yeah, I cited specifically, if you look, Representative Landry, of the verbiage.
From Colonel Davis, that's who
yes, he
instructed you.
Yes.
Okay.
And the verbiage on the language of the notification letter is
okay, thanks. Have you hired a lawyer outside of this situation?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Have you received a target letter from federal prosecutors?
No, ma'am.
Have federal prosecutors asked to interview you?
Never.
Earlier in your testimony, you referenced a litigation hold. What suit or investigation was that in relation to?
Ronald Greene.
That was the civil suit?
You know, Greene litigation hold.
Yeah, that was all of it.
Yes, that litigation hold is relative to Ronald Greene.
For the civil suit filed by his family?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall when you received that?
I believe it was July of last year. Do you remember?
Of 2021?
Yes, ma'am.
I thought, well, my understanding was that the suit was filed in 2020. I may be wrong on that. Are you relatively sure you received it last year?
Yes, ma'am. The litigation hold
Was in 2021?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you could not recall at what point in 2020 you turned your phone in?
I do have an idea. Yes, ma'am.
Around when?
That's part of the ongoing
Oh,
investigation.
they did go down that road.
Yes, ma'am.
For these Monday meetings that have been referenced, would you or any other troopers receive calendar invitations for them?
We still do that meeting, this administration, and we have a standing calendar. Invite.
Do you recall if you received them in 2019?
I don't.
You just don't. You don't remember either
I
way.
don't recall. I mean, somebody from Public Affairs went every Monday if they had the meeting to do that PIO brief and then leave.
Okay, but there may have been a calendar entry sent during that
I can
time.
look back on my calendar.
Okay,
Happy to
thank
do
you.
that, yeah.
This is, you may not know the answer to this, but the Axon program, you have access to that program, is that correct?
I do.
Is that, I don't know if I have the right word, organized or managed or run by a private contractor? Or was it purchased?
It was purchased, yes, ma'am.
So almost like Microsoft, like a Microsoft product, you would purchase it and then it's yours to use?
I assume so, yes, ma'am. I mean, we enter into a contract with the vendor to purchase that software and technology and equipment.
Okay, so that my next question would be, is there still a vendor that you interact with for troubleshooting on the program, if you know the answer to that?
I don't know, but I assume so. If we have problems, they would be responsible to provide support to the system.
Okay, but the substance of what's in the program is managed by state police. Is that correct?
That's out of my... But I certainly get an answer for you on that.
Okay, thank you.
We have a section called Technology Business Support that manages most of our technology solutions, from Axon, Evidence.com, Mark 23, our CAD RMS system, e-ticket, e-crash. So all of that is managed by Technology Business Support.
That's the name of the
command.
The subset?
Yes, ma'am.
It sounds like a lot of programs. Let's see. I do want to ask about... Rep. Jordan asked earlier about the supposed call to Chris Nakamoto about the August McKay or Mackey story. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of back and forth. So to clarify, did you call the reporter?
I did.
You did?
Yes, ma'am.
And from your memory, what did you ask him or tell him?
I spoke about the integrity of the EEO process and our concerns with releasing an EEO may hinder somebody else who is a victim to come forward if they know that this personal, offensive interaction would play out on the news. And that's the last thing we wanted to do, is diminish that process and make people hesitant from coming forward.
And that was with regard to the language he used.
The entire case, yes, ma'am.
Entire case. Okay. Final question. I'm just curious. Are you related to Burl Cain?
I'm not.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Representative Hughes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I fully intend to be under my 10 minutes. Lieutenant Colonel, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You first stated that you have 24 and a half years of service. Look, despite the tough questions that I and others have to ask, I do appreciate you putting on that uniform, and the women and men of state police who put on that uniform.
Thank you, Representative Hughes.
And just know today is nothing personal. I know it's uncomfortable for you at times to be at that table, and just know some of the questions that I'm about to ask may be uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for me to even sit on this committee because of this unfortunate incident.
Yes, sir.
Many of my colleagues asked about accountability and should folks be held accountable, and you dodged a lot of those questions. So let me just ask, in your opinion, within the culture of state police, you've been there over 2 decades. Do you think that there is a general bias amongst some of your colleagues against black men, or do you think that there's a genuine fear of black men amongst some of your colleagues within state police?
I can't speak to what other people are feeling, but certainly that's something we've addressed. We have put every single trooper on our department through implicit bias training so that they can understand biases that they may have, that we all have, and understand how that cannot factor into decisions you made. So that's an investment we made over the course of last year, working within a calendar year to train every single trooper, DPS officer, commissioned person in implicit bias.
Are you familiar with an incident that took place within the cafeteria at State Police Headquarters regarding a black man that was wearing a bow tie? Are you familiar with any type of situation like that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any thoughts?
I just heard that this week, an incident that involved.
How did you hear about it?
A person that was offended by that shared his story during a leadership discussion we had just this week during the Noble Conference.
Okay. Are you appointed by the governor or the superintendent of state police?
Superintendent.
Okay, and so you report directly to the superintendent?
Yes, sir.
You've acknowledged that you are under internal investigation, is that correct?
I am.
Okay. I'm going to go back to your text message from October 30th, 2020, regarding Vice Chairman Jordan. And you used the term, quote, working to earn his trust and confidence. I think you would acknowledge, just given this incident, there really is a lack of trust within state police, and I really do appreciate you working hard initially when you were appointed to earn Representative Jordan's trust. But I hope when you leave here today, all of these videos are archived on the website of the House of Representatives. And I hope that you will go back and look at your testimony from today. Because in my opinion, with all due respect, Lieutenant Colonel, I think your testimony has done very little to rekindle trust within state police. In fact, I think it has further eroded trust, in my opinion. Also, with all due respect, I have a really big problem. You're not just a typical rank and file officer. You are the number 2 man in state police. There's an active investigation, and I completely believe that everyone should have due process. But sir, I do not, with all due respect, and I'm glad to see the superintendent sitting in this room. And I'm just going to say it, and this is no disrespect to you. I don't see how there can be trust in state police where you actively remain in your role as the number 2 man, given the magnitude and scope of this investigation. I mean, the honorable thing, in my opinion, to do would be to voluntarily go on administrative leave with pay. But I think someone needs to have the political will or the courage to make that happen. We're not going to build trust in any shape, form, or fashion. And with all due respect, Lieutenant Colonel, I do not find your testimony today, most of it, to be credible. I don't. And that's not how we build trust.
Well, that's unfair, Representative Hughes, because I have been here and
well, I
answered
think
the
it's
questions
unfair how
I've
you've dodged many of the questions today. And I think it's unfair how you sent this email yesterday, the day before this hearing, and you're hiding behind this email on why you can't answer questions. I think that's deeply unfair. I think it's unfair how you're wasting my time when I should be in the Appropriations Committee, because you refuse to answer questions. We have a duty to investigate and get answers to try to bring justice to Mr. Greene's family. So when we talk about unfairness, it's unfair that my time is being wasted.
I don't control the process of that IA investigation. I just follow it, and I should follow it just as any other trooper who has to go through that process. And that's what we're doing, to be transparent, to go through the exact same process that any trooper that faces an allegation has to go through. And when that is complete, it will be made available to the public. The outcome, the results are public.
To that point, though, you've acknowledged that Clary had an IA investigation that has not been made to the public, and this is years down the road. Our frustration is that nothing is moving quickly on your IA investigations, and then you just keep saying, well, there's an investigation with no end date in sight. So we may be all unelected next term, and then that's when the report's going to come out. When it's a very simple issue. This is not a complicated issue. I mean, I think this IA investigation is malarkey. I mean, I think this is a clear attempt to not be transparent and then be able to say you're being transparent. And I really am. I share Representative Hughes' frustration on the point, because if you're being transparent, this would have been done long ago. This would have been done. And frankly, you're not a regular trooper. You're sitting here and saying, I'm being investigated, blah, blah, blah. You're the number 2 guy in state police who's being investigated by his superior officer, the only one superior officer ahead of him. This is not an usual situation. This is an unusual situation, in my opinion. And frankly, you seem deeply unconcerned that you're being investigated for this. And the tenor of the email is like you're a public informations officer telling me that at some point you're going to let me know when you've been cleared of this case.
Representative Chairman McGee, I'm sorry if that's how it came across, but I am not concerned about the outcome of this investigation because I have nothing to hide. I didn't do anything wrong, and I believe that will bear out in the course of this investigation.
Well, I look forward to getting results in 2028.
There's a
Representative Nelson has a question for you.
Here.
I'm sorry, Representative Hughes, you done? I apologize. I cut you off.
No, Mr. Chairman, I'm done. Thank you.
Lieutenant Colonel,
Representative Nelson has a question for you.
I know you've been answering a lot of questions, so I'll try and be brief. I'm at the tail end of this, I think. If you hear me talk, it's probably the end, so it's good news. But I had a specific question about your meeting with D.A. Belton on May 20th, right before the AP released the video. I think he requested that meeting, correct?
The meeting with Colonel Reeves, I'm not sure of. I just staffed Colonel Reeves. I know for the meeting when...
No, last May, on May 20th, I think you guys drove up to meet with D.A. Belton. Is that correct? I think
with Colonel
Davis, yes.
He requested that.
And he requested, what was the purpose of that meeting?
He didn't contact me. He contacted the colonel, so the Colonel Davis could speak with that.
Okay, and then when you're at the meeting, could you tell me specifically what was discussed or what you guys went over while you were there?
I certainly would defer to D.A. Belton, but in general, he was just kind of asking questions, perspective, history, that type of stuff. But
And
we fully cooperated.
And did you go over the Clary video? Did you discuss that with him at all in that meeting?
I defer to D.A. Belton on the discussion of that.
But you were there, right?
Yes, sir.
And so did you look at the video? I mean, did you go over that? I'm not asking for interpretation, just yes or no. You looked at the video and you reviewed it with him?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That's the only question I had.
Yes, sir.
Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Landry, with a question. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Villio with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lieutenant Colonel Cain, I appreciate attorney-client privilege. I appreciate not discussing publicly criminal investigations. I do. And I may differ from my colleagues on some of those particular issues. But regarding the administrative investigation into your phone and the sanitization of your phone, I'm assuming that investigation would have been approved by Colonel Davis. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And as I understand, the phones were retrieved yesterday.
That's what I heard in the testimony, but I'm not aware of that.
Right. So I believe that, I don't know where Colonel Davis is on the list. I see him sitting here. But I do think Colonel Davis has some questions to answer regarding the timing of that investigation. Because like my colleagues, I believe that looks like a ploy to not allow us to have the answers in this committee that we were expecting, and everyone knew and anticipated that there would be questions surrounding those phones. Why? Because 2 weeks ago, we listed all of the exhibits we wanted. We talked about why we wanted them. Last week, we questioned Colonel Reeves on these issues. And then just yesterday, phones are taken, and we're advised by you or the chairman that there's an investigation and you can't comment. So I appreciate that you have department rules that you're following, but Colonel Davis does have some questions to answer in that regard and the timing of that investigation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And Representative Villio, just so I did anticipate that would be a question, as I said in my email, and I sought guidance from Colonel Davis, and of course I'm bound by the administrative investigative rules and policies.
I'm
But I-
going to assume, and it may be a big assumption, but I am going to assume that you didn't voluntarily make yourself a target of that investigation. Now, I will admit that that's an assumption. For all I know, everybody got in a room and decided, how are we going to avoid the questions and answers? I'm just speculating for a moment. But to give you the benefit of the doubt for a moment, I'm going to assume that that didn't happen and that you didn't make yourself a target of an investigation. But the timing of the seizure of those phones, if you want to call it a seizure, and your inability to discuss the wiping of the phones is wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Villio. That's actually all the questions we have for Trooper Cain, and I appreciate him coming today.